Hello to all the listeners and welcome to CEC Gurukul lectures. Ladies and all the listeners, today we will be discussing a very important topic, international organizations and global governance. Today in this lecture, we will be having a look over the fact that is what important role do international organizations can play in global governance. As we go ahead, it is very essential to see and accept the fact that though international politics is marked by anarchy, international politics is having a very definite idea that there is no world government, unlike at the domestic level where we have government which is marked by hierarchies of legislature, executive, judiciary. International organizations are important actors in international politics. Though international arena is marked by anarchy, but international organizations play important role in international politics. To name some here, they have the power in mediation of disputes and process. They have had great influence in the dispute resolution mechanism. They have played an important role in several other avenues, to name some like peacekeeping. So therefore, when we look at the significant role international organizations have played and are playing in the realm of international politics, the ambit is wide. They have staked their voice in the process of mediation of disputes. They have attempted to sort out disputes which otherwise would have led to more crisis, chaos, and yes, they have made definite attempts for peacekeeping. Alongside that, when we try to understand the role of international organizations in global governance, how they have made an attempt to apply sanctions to countries who have in a way done things which hampers world peace and security. Alongside that, when we look at the global areas of concern, be it global health, monetary policies, fiscal discipline, educational arena, climate change, global problems like nuclear weapons, global issues of international terrorism. On all these matters, international organization at various levels, global, regional and at other forums too, are making important contribution to sustain world peace and order. Now as we go ahead, let's understand that how international system to what we see right now in the contemporary form has come. So as we say, to understand any phenomena, it is essential to understand its history. Now when we try to look at the modern international system and as to how it has acquired its current architectural format, at the very outset, let's accept it that international system has grown over a period of time. It has evolved over a period of time. This is why we say that there are built-in overlapping phases over time. Now, what are these phases like? Let us understand. At the very outset, the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 made state as the primary tool of decision in international relations. Treaty of Westphalia is also responsible for placing state as the main rational unit of analysis for understanding international politics. This also gives importance to state sovereignty as an important variable to understand in the discussion of international system. So what we see here is that whenever we try to understand international system, whichever phase of history are we talking about, First World War, Second World War, Cold War, post-Cold War, globalization, or in the contemporary time of deglobalization and reglobalization too. It is the state which is the primary tool of decision, which is the main rational unit of understanding in international domains, and a lot of this owes to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Now, after this first phase comes how agreements between states were fostered in by the Congress of Vienna, which took place in 1885. And this later on moved on to how the architecture of the multilateral system, having its core in the idea of cooperation, in the idea of joint action, comes up later. To name an example here, the United Nations. Also to name certain kinds of international organization which have led to a multilateral system, namely the Bretton Woods Conference or the GATT agreement, which later became the WTO. So friends, dear listeners, as we see that international organizations have evolved over a period of time. So on the same corollary, international system too has evolved over a definite period of time. Now we can identify three main phases. First is the status system, as we saw, which was ushered in by the Treaty of Westphalia. Followed by that, how there were agreements between states, and this was fostered by the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and this later metamorphosed or evolved into a multilateral system that we see in the contemporary time. And the best example that one can often invoke here is the United Nations system. Now, if international organizations are significant, if international system, as we have seen, it has evolved and definitely moving towards to make more progress in global politics, what it is that counts for, or what are the factors responsible for the increase in role of international organizations? First of all, let us accept that there has been increase of the mandate and objectives any organization must cater to in global politics. Today, the mandate is no longer about security in the form of control and domination. Today, the mandate is having a holistic plural note with having more contours like freedom from unemployment, freedom from poverty, need to tackle new forms of security threats like narcotics, pandemics, terrorism, climate change, global warming, environmental degradation, feminist concerns, and wherein what one thing is common, that the threats cut across all borders. The threats can arise from any time. Now, in such a scenario, there has been a definite increase in role. There has been a definite reassessment of the multi-advantages international organizations can present in global politics. There has been review of their mandates and objectives too. At the same time, let us also appreciate the fact that there has been increase in number of members of several international organizations. To take certain example, if we see at the global level, we have a supranational governance model presented by the WTO. WTO, when we look at the history of the GATT rounds from 1927 to Annecy round to Dilian round to Tokyo round, the number of members who have taken part in WTO negotiations has increased. At the same time, there has been increase in membership of world organizations like the United Nations. At the same time, there has been increase in members of even organizations like European Union, which started with few, but with time, with Treaty of Maastricht, it came up as a definite bloc. So there has been increase in number of members, and at the same time there have been nations like Turkey wherein there is a big case whether they should be included in the European Union or no. At the same time there is a debate whether did Great Britain did right to opt out of European Union, namely via the Brexit. Now, another factor that accounts for the increase in role of international organization is the accelerating pace of globalization. Now, dear listeners, it is essential to understand here that globalization signifies movement of goods, services, people. Now, this movement, exchange of ideas, interdependence is nothing new. It even existed in the past. To take an example, the Great Silk Route, how there was movement of goods and services between India and China, or to talk about how kadai, how things like handi were exchanged between two countries. So movement of ideas even existed in the past. But what is essential to understand about the contemporary globalization is the unprecedented nature of connect, is how labor and capital are much more in a meshy interplay. Globalization today has several dimensions: political, economic, technological, cultural, and amidst all this, when issues have arrived, when processes are in play, international organizations have to definitely play an important role. When we look at the political level, there is rise of supranational governance, and international organizations have to factor in this aspect in their various deliberations and summit. At the economic side, when we see that there is a free trade regime, international organizations have to voice out concerns, have to ensure that the benefits of trade are equal and of just parity for all negotiating member states. When we talk about technological dimension, there is rapid rise in communications, rapid rise in new forms of technology. This places e-governance at the core of agenda, domestic policy making of several states, and international organizations have to factor in these aspects also when they are talking about larger aspects of multilateral cooperation. Cultural, today every country, be it north or south, definitely is having some kind of onslaught of hegemonization, some kind of onslaught of standardization, some kind of impact of consumerism. Now all these are agendas that have definitely given more space to international organization to present it to their member states, and this has led to increasing reviewing and extended mandates for them, which in turn definitely makes a case for increase in role of international organizations in global governance. At the same time, when we look at supervision and liberalization of international trade, today there are various kinds of trade agreements that exist, and these trade agreements demand that states should get together and ensure that there are better avenues of cooperation, and at the same time international organizations give a framework for negotiations. An example here could be the climate change, how through international forums, diplomatic avenues, there are attempts being made in order to ensure that countries get to cooperate with each other on the aspect of global warming, climate change, environmental degradation. International organizations have another significant role, that is in formalizing trade agreements. So here we see that the ambit of the functioning of international organizations has increased. They are no longer limited to the traditional format. They are equally essential for the non-traditional new kinds of past, present as well as future challenges and opportunities. Now, this also brings us to another important question that we need to ask ourselves: why do states participate in international organization? Why do states participate in international organizations? Now, answer to this comes from the fact that international organizations are nurturing expertise, knowledge, information. They have the time to ensure that right kind of policy analysis is done. So therefore, states believe that let's delegate in authority in matters that may require certain kind of expertise that they may not have, certain kind of knowledge paradigm which they may not be having sufficient, certain kind of information wherein they may be lacking, and above all, time. Time is a great factor. So looking at all these things, states are motivated to participate in international organization. This is why we have to see that no matter there may be criticism of structure and functioning of a particular kind of international organization, however, that criticism does not merit that states are leaving it. States are still parts of various regional as well as global forums that cater to solve international issues and contribute to global governance. Now, why it is that problems cannot be addressed unilaterally? Because we have to see that today, when it be international peace and security, be it be economic development, international trade, human rights, they all require functional and technical cooperation. There is no longer a one-way affair. You have to ensure that these things are factored in by a unique kind of cooperation, and IOs, international organizations, offer a platform to address at problems from a holistic perspective, because today times are complex, today issues are contested. It may benefit some, but at the same time one cannot ignore that how it may harm many others. Today there is overlapping of power, and amidst all this, when we look at international peace and security issues, when we look at economic development, where example to state here, multinational corporations are at one time seen to be giving more kinds of jobs and contributing to profit of the country, but at the same time multinational corporations are also blamed for all kind of wrong kind of degradation that happens in the nation. Similarly, when we look at human rights, there are new claims made on part of the state from various non-state actors. At the same time, when we look at avenues of environment, when we look at pleas for sustainable development, when we look at pleas for better utilization of resources. Now, living at a world where there is space-time compression, living at a time of globalization where whatever happens at the global level is connected to the local, and whatever happens at the local level is connected to the global. Now, amidst all this, where there is complete redefinition of our social geography too, if we go by the definitions of experts, what is the one common thing that comes across these multiple perspectives is all need joint action. And when all issues need joint actions, then unilateralism or the decision to act alone does not look like a wise policy, a proposition and stand. Now, see, organizations exist everywhere. But what is that international organizations, they are different from other organizations? Now, dear listeners, to answer to this question, I present to you a quote from the work of Robert Keohane and Joseph Nye. Now, they say that the terms of the concept of global governance promoted by international organizations, now this was originally based on raw power. But there are two things that have definitely made international organizations stand out distinctively from other organizations, that is legitimacy and the customs. Now, legitimacy debate is a big debate that is going on in the discipline of IR. At the same time, customs There is a big debate over that too. But again, let's take one thing from Kyohan and I, that there are other organizations too, but what makes international organization definitely more acceptable, definitely much more stable in terms of their larger approach is because of legitimacy and customs that surround therewith. At the same time, as we've seen that international organizations face their own set of criticisms also. Now, the criticisms can come from various dimensions. There are issues at times with their structure as to whether there is adequate representation of all member states in terms of their decision-making apparatus, in terms of their voting mandate. So, there have been criticism of organization from WTO to European Union to even various other kinds of regional forums. There has been criticism of their operations, wherein international organizations have been active in a particular domain but not active in another particular domain. They have had a joint voice in certain areas like energy crisis, but they did not put forward a joint voice where there was so much contestation. An example here is environment, because the concerns of the developed are different from that of the developing world. Now, there is criticism of international relation organization from the other aspect, that is when we look at the context. Now, the context within which the textual idea of international organization is operating, that is international relations, that has become a complex phenomena. Today, the notion of security has moved from traditional to non-traditional. Today, the idea of power is no longer about just domination. The idea of power as domination is just not military. Today, we have knowledge, we have economic, we have soft power avenues, which are equally as significant like other kinds of power. So, and at the same time, as we have discussed, that how supranational and transnational characteristics of certain international organizations undermine national decision making. And here is an example wherein at times if we take an example from our very own country, India, when India signed WTO, at the same time several states in India protested against the signing of WTO by the country India. Why? Because they say that though the mandate of international trade is with the national government, but international trade has ramifications for agriculture, and agriculture is a concern of the state. So, somewhere states found that their power was somewhere contested by the power of the national decision making apparatus. At the same time, the supranational apparatus of decision making is blamed for bypassing the democratic aspirations at the grassroots. Who is taking the decisions in the big bureaucratic structure that is often considered into account. So, alongside state sovereignty, there is also an issue of lack of political will. At times, big powers, they don't want certain kind of right solution at right time for a problem, and the problem gets on magnified. There have been debates of on whether humanitarian intervention was justified or not, or whether humanitarian intervention was just used as a mechanism to further certain kind of vested interest. So, international organizations too have been subject of criticism from their structure, operations, looking at how IR today is a complex phenomena, and of course looking at that how supranational and transnational aspects undermine the national decision. Now, we have been talking about international organization. The other parameter that we need to be seeing, that is global governance. The lecture is codified or named, tagged as role of international organizations in global governance. Now, dear listeners, to understand the concept of global governance, we take few words from the Commission on Global Governance, that is from 1995. And how does this commission define governance? Let's have a look. That governance is some of the many ways individuals and institutions, public and private, manage their common affairs. Now, when we talk about governance, it is essential to understand what does a certain authentic report say. Now, I present to you the work that is Commission on Global Governance 1995, and how does it define governance. Now, this very definition gives us the vast paradigm, explains to us the challenges that are involved in the very idea of global governance. So, therefore, global governance is sum of many ways: individuals and institutions, public and private. How do they manage their common affairs? It is a continuing process through which conflicting or diverse interests may be accommodated and cooperative action may be taken. It includes formal as well as informal arrangements that people and institutions have agreed to or perceived to be in their interest. Now, dear listeners, we will be taking this definition one by one. At the first thing, we have to see that global governance involves individuals as well as institutions, public as well as private. That means state is no longer the only unit of analysis. State is the primary factor of analysis in international politics, but state is not the sole factor. So, that means the input to understand global politics is plural now. Earlier it was singular, unilinear, that is primarily the state. So, we have to move away from a statist perspective. Then, solutions to international problems do not just come in one meeting or do not just come in one dialogue. So, therefore, we have to see, because the problems are complex, they involve multiple stakeholders. So, therefore, the governance, in order to manage the problems, it is a continuing process. And this continuing process is because from the very second line that we understand, that is, our interests are conflicting, our interests are diverse. A particular country A may want good trade, a particular country B may want good environment, a particular country C may want better defense deals. So, what we see here is that it is a continuous process, and at the same time we have to see that today when you talk about diplomatic negotiation, it is just not formal, it also involved informal arrangements, and informal arrangements, but at the core of it is interest. Something that appeals to everyone's interest is definitely accepted. So, here we have the ambit of global governance involving individuals as well as institutions. It is a constant process, it keeps on going because our issues today are much more diverse, and at the same time we have to see that today we have formal as well as informal networks, agreements and arrangement. Now, again, at the same time, we have to understand that there is no world government at present. We don't hear about particular kind of a president of the world. We don't hear about certain kind of prime minister of the world. So, there is no world government at present. And this thing is, very there. I mean, one constant thing which we look at, be it the Treaty of Westphalia, be it the Congress of Vienna that we discuss, or the rise of multilateral system also. There is no world government. However, global governance is existing when we look at the problematic, the issues of contestation of international relations. So, within this context of IR, definitely global governance is existing. And then when we look at study of international organization, then within this global governance, one example in history that is important for us to see, that is, it was a League of Nations. The first experiment in the idea of international organization or in the idea of global governance that was implemented. That is how nations can get together to cooperate. And though the League of Nations was started as a great grandiose idea, but people have dubbed it as an idealist way, which talked about Woodrow Wilson 14 peace point agreements, that is better navigation rules, respecting peace and sovereignty of other countries, fostering respect for security of other nations, all these. But League of Nations did not prove to be successful. Now, after the League of Nations, when we look at the international organizations, there was this creation of Institute of International Affairs. When we look at Europe, there was the Royal Institute of International Affairs. When we look at America, examples from this, your very own Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, when we look at the post-Second World War time, what we see here is that there was Atlantic Charter in 1941, if we recall our post-Second World War history, or if we look at our early Cold War idea. Then followed by that, the Moscow Declaration on October 30th, 1943, between the victorious powers, looking at how to take the world forward. The Yalta Summit, February 1945. All this definitely was a catalyst in promoting the idea of a significant role international organizations can play in managing the world affairs. And an example here, the beautiful example that we often quote, the San Francisco Conference that led to the creation of the United Nations. So what we see here is that, again, starting from the study of why did League of Nations did not work, to looking into the way new kinds of forums came forward, to San Francisco Conference actually coming up with the World Governance Forum. Today, even the agenda of this World Governance Forum that we call as United Nations has diversified. When we look at the basic principles of United Nations, be it peace, security, respecting other countries' territory, fostering international peace, amidst that, today United Nations, through its specialized agencies, is active in areas like environmental protection, sustainable development, women's rights, rights of the girl child, human settlements, food supply, elimination of poverty. Now, all this, it is essential to see that today issues of global governance and for the international organizations thereof are much more complex. Now, when we try to see that amidst this, there has been a criticism of international organizations too, primarily in terms of the structure, operations, primarily in terms at times when there have been areas where they performed, and some areas where they did not perform. Now, therefore, looking at the present time, there is a need to reassess the role of international organizations. So, global governance, the outcome that is coming forward, it is interaction of transnational actors that is aimed at solving global and transnational problems. International governance uses international organizations as a medium, as a means. So, therefore, then international organizations definitely have an important role to play in fostering global development, be it at the economic level, be it for free trade, be it for better negotiation of crisis and chaos. So, therefore, looking at the vast ambit within which global governance has to operate, looking at the numerous challenges that have come forward, international organizations have an important role to play, because today this global governance is about interaction of transnational actors aimed at solving global transnational problems. And this today, when we look at this global governance, it needs international organization as a forum, as a mediator, as an interface, as a medium. So, therefore, there is a great reassessment that needs to be done amidst all the criticisms of international organization in terms of their utility for global development. So, again, when we try to look at some of the positives, some great work that has been done by international organization, some examples that I can present to you. The United Nations peacekeeping forces received Nobel Peace Prize on 15th May 1988. When we look at the the WTO has been a successor to the General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs on 1st January 1995 it came into being, and today there are numerous countries who were earlier not part of GATT rounds, but today these countries are part of World Trade Organization. Then at the same time, one has to also look into how the agenda of world governance forums like United Nations or be other kinds of forums had magnified, and the great work they have been doing in their respective realms. The work done in revamping health and looking after medicines and looking after new kinds of disease and looking after new research to be done, that is done by World Health Organization. The work done by World Bank in the sense of infrastructure development of particular countries, in fighting poverty, in looking after irrigation and water supply. The work done by World Organization for Animal Health for looking into the health of animals, and the work done by Food and Agriculture Organization in looking to problems of food scarcity. So what we see here is that international organizations have supplemented to the efforts of states in fighting various kinds of domestic problems maybe, but they have international ramifications too. And as we said at the very outset, because global governance is much more challenging today, and one of the reasons for why global governance is challenging is because what is global is connected to the local, and what is local has link with the global. So right from getting Nobel Peace Prize to increase in number of states in a particular organization to specialized services offered in various avenues like health, food, education, infrastructure, IOs have played an important role in world governance. Now, let's accept it that IOs have their limitations also. And one of the limitations for IOs that come forward is from that how that the states that compose IOs, that are the member states of a particular international organization, certain kind of problems may exist from there. And there have been instances when even UN was criticized, wherein in a particular case it was ready with sanctions, whereas in another case it was not ready with sanctions. There have been cases where even UN was criticized for acting well in a particular case, but not acting so well in another case. And then collective action on problems definitely reach a roadblock. Maybe it could be because institutionalized inability or incapacity or certain kind of just unwillingness to act. So therefore collective problems face numerous kinds of issues too, and this problems faced by problems faced in managing of collective goods and collective problems then put a question mark on the structure, working and operations of the international organization. Now at the same time we have to see that the world is not what it was there when the First World War was going on, not when during the Second World War, when Germany was on a major power, or not like the time when there was Cold War going, when the world was completely bipolar, that is between two superpowers, and there was battle of ideology. Today, the world is witnessing new rising powers. India, South Africa, Brazil, these are rising powers, and IOs, many international organizations are yet to adapt and accommodate these power shifts. Today, when the power is much more plural, today when governance is having new kinds of stakeholders, we cannot look at the perspectives from the ideas of the past. And a case here that is often said is that how UN Security Council needs reform. It is a great forum for looking after world peace and security issues, but at the same time it is yet to accommodate the rise in power paradigm, the rise the new kinds of powers that are coming up in the global forum, namely in terms of its decision making and representative structure. So that is, IOs have their own limitations, dear listeners, and we have to take this into account while understanding their role that even United Nations has been criticized. And again, let's look at when we're trying to solve global problems, collective problems have their own issues. When we look at issues of institutionalized inability as well, or at times when we look at certain kinds of unwillingness on part of certain powers. And also not to forget that today there are new kinds of rising powers, and new kinds of rising power, they need to be accommodated. Their concerns need to be accommodated in various forums. That is, again, examples of countries, that is India, South Africa, Brazil. Now, of course, there are great positives. Of course, there are limitations. But where do we go forward? See, one thing is for sure that global governance is plural, having multiple stakeholders, public as well as private, individuals as well as institutions. Problems are having multiple stakes too. So therefore, problems are common problems now. So when we look at this scenario, within this, IOs too also have to reform in order to answer to the needs of changing as well as challenging time. IOs need to have the capacity within them to change, to adapt, to modify in order to present right panacea for all the problems that are presented to them. Then of course the focus has to be on the quality of their governance. Just periodic summits, periodic meetings, other things may not do much good. So therefore, much emphasis has to go on the quality of their governance. Now at the same time, IOs also have to recognize, and they must accept the idea that non-state actors are significant too. And why? Because somewhere they are okay on the legitimacy paradigm, on the effective paradigm. To name here non-state actors like global social movements, IOs have to look into their demands. Why is it that they are opposing non-state actors like multinational corporations, non-state actors like transnational organizations? IOs have to look into that. They cannot be having a regime of or talks on economics and development without taking into account their inputs, or without taking into account what is they have to say. So therefore, it is essential for the international organization to reassess their roles too in global governance, that is present and future challenges. The present challenges will get more magnified and complex in future, and this calls for more flexibility and more adaptability in the solutions they offer to the world. Lastly, one also has to see in the reform idea of international organizations that today we are living at a time where there is complete space-time compression, internet, new forms of communications and technology. Every day there is an app for new kinds of need. All this has led to shrinking of world in terms of its space, in terms of its time. Now within this, e-governance is something that is put forward by developed as well as developing world, and IOs have to take into account this reality too in the sense of their working and functions in order to meet out to global problems in a much more realistic and holistic way. So therefore, the need for nurturing the capacity to change, the need to enhance the quality of performance and governance approach, the need to recognize and see how non-state actors are equally significant like the state actors, and the very appreciation for the idea that is how our present and future challenges, they call for more flexibility and adaptability in solutions, and again looking at a much more holistic idea of that is today we are living in an internet age, today we are living in a knowledge society, and within all this they have to navigate us for managing global problems. Now any lecture should also have certain kind of input for further reading. So dear listeners, at this hour, I'd like to tell you that For further reading, do read E.H. Carr's the magnus opus book, that is The 20 Years Crisis 1919 to 1939. This book is very significant for all the listeners, from students to academia to practitioners to teachers, as to how the idea of international organizations was nurtured via the League of Nations, how there was the idealist realist debate, and within this, we have to, within this idea, we have to see the kind of crisis the world has gone through. You must read the report by the Commission on Global Governance. That's a report in 1995. And the title of the report is very interesting. That is, see, our global neighborhood. That means, the idea of neighborhood earlier was, I know my neighbor. But today, when we are trying to look at international politics, the neighborhood is global. So therefore, we must have a look at this report. So whenever we try to approach the topic of international organizations in global governance, we have to see that international organizations offer important role in global politics, from power settlement of dispute, from mediation, from offering new kinds of avenues to foster trade and development, from giving platforms for cooperation on new kinds of global problems that have emerged, from climate change to global warming to narcotics to pandemics to gender issues to labor issues. Amidst all this, IOs play an important role. Now, when we say that IOs have played an important role, we have to also see that today governance has become problematic. Within this governance, there is public as well as private. There is individuals as well as there is institutions, and which makes us accept the fact that state is still the primary factor of analysis, but the state is no longer the only factor of analysis. This state has to be seen in tandem with non-state actors that have acquired their own legitimacy and effectiveness. We must go through the work of Keohane and Nye, who all tell us in their work in 2001 that earlier international organizations were just based on raw power. But today these international organizations, they have, because of legitimacy, because of customs, acquired new kind of their own significance. Now, right from getting Peace Prize for peacekeeping forces by the United Nations, to increase in number of states in earlier GATT rounds to contemporary WTO, international organizations definitely have had their success stories too. But at the same time, there has been criticism also of their structure, of their operation and of their functions, wherein in some cases they were seen very active, whereas in some cases they did not act that well, wherein in some forum there was collaborative action, but in other cases there was no collaborative action. So what we see here is that international organizations have their flip side also, and this needs reform. The very fact that we do away with international organization is not a good idea. Let's accept it that today the narrative of the world is changing. The time when the world saw globalization after the great history of wars, that is First World War, followed by Second World War, followed by Cold War. Globalization definitely gave hope for the world in the sense of a world wherein there was one kind of power, that was the United States. Globalization definitely connected the world, and with this connection of the world, it had several implications at political, technological, social, cultural, economic, ecological, women, labor, so on and so forth. Now, within this, IO's mandate have also increased, and this increase in mandate demands that looking at the past, present and future challenges, which are definitely having a great joining link to international organizations, have to work. And this idea of understanding, comprehension and appreciation of these problems definitely would make international organizations much more viable in terms of solutions they offer to global politics, to global world for times to come. And again, whenever you try to look at international organizations, at the same time you also have to look at the new kind of challenges that have come up in the global governance regime. So dear listeners, This was on international organization and global governance. Do go through the further readings so that we can enhance our understanding of international organization, the role they play at various global, regional level too, the kind of challenges they are facing, the kind of good work they have done, and of course the kind of limitations they have faced on their part in terms of delivery of goods, in terms of delivery of solutions to manage global affairs. So, when we try to look at international organizations and global governance, one thing which is essential for us to comprehend in our analysis is that today the problems of the world are much more connected. Interdependence is a defining norm of the contemporary world, and when interdependence is a defining norm, we have to have a holistic, comprehensive perspective on management of global problems. And when we look at this aspect, IOs too are not immune. We do not exist in isolation. The idea of reversing globalization, some parts did forward via the syndrome of deglobalization, somewhere yet that is yet to get the right kind of merit of argument needed to sustain it. So therefore, IOs definitely have an important role in global governance. International organizations are imperative to understand international politics. International organizations are an important means of fostering cooperation for global issues and at the same time fostering international development.